So I guess I'll go over the air test Google form thing that Turner gave us. Okay, so the 17th Amendment was established to establish the direct election of U.S. senators, select the group that supported the ratification. So it can't be wealthy business leaders. Why? Because it would give them less control over who gets sent to Congress, uh, which is, and if the state legislature did that, or yeah, if the state legislature was able to, uh, okay, let's restart. Wealthy business leaders could influence state legislatures by like lobbying and giving them money to choose their preferred candidate instead of the people's choice, which so it can't be wealthy business leaders. State political party bosses, it also can't be this because obviously state political party bosses, from what I think, my reasoning is that it'll give them also like less control over who gets sent to Congress and the decisions and like it'll weaken their power in ability to influence Congress. So it can't be them either. Members of the Populist Party. So the Populist Party was a political party uh in the US. Shoot, I'm forgetting my A push knowledge. But basically it was more like for the people. They supported like more for the people popular sovereignty things and that the people should have a say in things and because it's the people's right. So it can't be it has to be the populace or supporters. And obviously critics of the powerful state legislatures, obviously, because they're removed. The 17th Amendment removed the ability of state legislatures to uh, send senators to Congress. So, what event brought the adoption of the 25th Amendment? So, the 25th Amendment was uh, uh, ratified in 1967. So, Woodrow Wilson, it can't be this one because Woodrow Wilson was president from, if I remember correctly, like 1912 to 1920, somewhere around that. And yes, he did become ill while in office, and he had a stroke that severely restricted his ability to do things, but they covered that up until it was after office, till people started finding out. So it can't be Wilson. President JFK was assassinated and succeeded by his Johnson, who had heart problems himself. And the presidency of JFK uh did happen. Like JFK was actually the assassination of JFK was actually the reason that brought this 25th Amendment. So and then um like and then after he was assassinated, the vice president would become president, which is Johnson, who had heart problems. But President JFK's assassination was the cause of the 25th Amendment. Um, and then kind of sparked concern of secession of the presidency's powers. And then Franklin Delano Roosevelt, yeah, he died in office. Um, but he was succeeded by Truman. This one is unrelated, really. It was the 22nd Amendment. I think 22nd Amendment that 20 or yeah 22nd Amendment that limited terms, so it's not this. And then Ronald Reagan, uh, I mean, it was invoked by Reagan, but uh, the 25th Amendment was used by Reagan, but his presidency happened after the amendment, nearly 20 years afterwards, so it can't be that either. So during the 1920s, the manufacture, sale, transportation, import or export of alcoholic beverages was illegal across the United States. Why did it take the ratification of the 21st Amendment to the Constitution in 1933 to make alcohol manufacture, sale, transportation, importation, or exportation legal again? It can't be states because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution, which states federal over state law, and this is an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which therefore it applies to everyone. So it can't be states and states. No. Supreme Court refused to rule on the federal law banning alcohol. It wasn't a federal law, it was an amendment to the Constitution. So this is out. Congressional representatives knew that they would lose voters if they reversed the original federal law. Again, it wasn't federal law. Uh, and it was an amendment to the Constitution, which is two separate things. So it's like a Constitution, federal law, state law, kind of. An amendment was banned. Alcohol was banned by an amendment to the Constitution, and only another amendment could repeal it. This is the answer. Because since it's to the Constitution itself, and the only way to uh repeal something or change something in the Constitution is to add something new, uh, changing it. So what was one change by the 1851 Ohio Constitution that affected how the state was governed? The the Ohio Constitution of 1851 increased the power of the General Assembly. No, it cannot. It's not this. As stated in the video about the Ohio Constitution, the 51 Constitution actually decreased the power of the General Assembly, the legislature. The Ohio Constitution limited the amount of debt the state could accumulate. Yes, because well, the state had a lot of debt issues and could had very high debt problems uh prior to to the 51 Constitution. So yes, the Constitution permitted the General Assembly to enact retroactive laws. This is false. It actually banned the General Assembly from making retroactive laws, and retroactive laws are kind of uh like criminalizing, making things illegal that happen, like making actions that happened in the past illegal. And then the Constitution lifted a restriction on how the state could spend its tax funds. No, that is false. Um, uh, the state had to spend tax money on like the stated tax money could only be used for the purpose that it was created for. So no. So the 20th Amendment, ratified in 1933, shortens the period between election day and the time where the President and members of Congress take office. The situation of the 20th Amendment made a practical movement. What situation made the 20th Amendment a practical improvement? So we're in 1933 now. The original Constitution is written in the 1780s. Wait, 1790s. Well, whatever. It was written quite a while ago with different technology. So the Electoral College needed more time to certify the results of the election. Well, no, the Electoral College, um, it's like it's completely different, like completely unrelated because well, no, well, like basically, I'm gonna stop because I'm just gonna not make sense. So this one is false. Electoral college is the way on how the president gets decided and doesn't really have anything to do too much with the transition period. And the public demanded more results from the newly elected administrations and wanted the president and Congress to begin serving sooner. As far as I know, never heard of something like this before, and never heard of the public demanding more results from the newly elected administrations. And there's just like limitations to how fast transition can happen. And serving students, it doesn't really make much sense. So better and faster transition made the long delay between the election of a new president and inauguration necessary. Yes. Why? Because it shortens the period between election day. And this is the reason why it got shortened. It's because we got better technology and stuff, which made it easier for transition to happen. As like 1930, we got cars, we got trains, we got steam-powered boats and whatnot. And to the contrary of before, it's like horse-drawn carriages and wind-powered boats and like walking by foot. After the election, the outgoing president was eager to step down and hand over, well, like, no, just this one is just a common sense no. So, citizens must choose between a plan to build a new city auditorium or a plan to restore an old one. Supporters of the new auditorium claimed that building a new auditorium would be more economical than restoring the old one. In, val in, val in evaluating the credibility to this claim, citizens should pay particular attention to the number of performances held in the auditorium each year, the amount of money the supporters spend on promoting the position, the popularity of the supporters as community leaders, the projected cost data provided by architects and accountants. So, supporters claim that a new auditorium would be more economical than restoring the old one. So, this one is dependent on the auditorium, and you don't know what would happen if a new auditorium was made, because then you demolish the old one. The amount of money the supporters spend on promoting their position, that doesn't really that does not really back up their claim of would be more economical than restoring the old one. So no. Popularity supporters with community leaders, that doesn't really support the credibility of the claim and what citizens should pay attention to. The projected cost of data provided by architects and accountants, so like people designing it and then people seeing how much it will cost. Yes, that relates to the more economical claim than restoring the older one. So, a town council faces budget cuts and can no longer afford to pay for landscaping in town parks. How could a citizen work within his or her community to help the local government address this problem? By emailing Ohio's congressional delegation to inform them of the issue. Well, yeah, this could work, but it's the congressional delegation, which is the one that gets sent to the US Congress, which is quite, it's not very local anymore, as it's town council and local community, local government. That's not like a very big problem. This is down to the local issue. So it can't be this. It cannot be this, the first one. By organizing a group of a group of residents to volunteer weekly for park maintenance. Well, the question says the town council can no longer afford to pay for landscaping in town parks. How could a citizen work within his or her community to help address the problem? And uh, volunteering for weekly park maintenance would help, as volunteering is free and not paid. So there would be contributing to the community. By requesting that governor supply the town with state funds for park maintenance, yeah, that would work. But it's not really working within his or her community to help, because that kind of brings it to the state level now. And then same thing with the last one. So federalism is one of the basic principles established in the US Constitution. Which factor describes how government in the United States reflects a federal structure? So federalism, what do we know about federalism? Federalism is the division of power and kind of like a little bit decentralized control, but has like a hierarchy still. Let's see. The division of power among state, local, and federal government. Yeah, that's the definition of federalism. This division of power between state, local, or between federal, state, and local governments. Division of power of elephant. I don't even know what that is. What division of geography between northern and southern? What does geography have to do with federalism? And that, no. Okay, so why might lawmakers increase taxes and decrease government spending? So in the video we talked about decreasing taxes to like make growth happen. Why might but this one's the opposite. Why might lawmakers increase taxes and decrease government spending? So let's see. To reduce unemployment, well, when there's less money going around, less spending going on in total, it would actually make employment increase because it kind of slows the economy down. To increase consumer spending, that's a no, because when there's more taxes, you have less money to spend, and what you can't buy as much money with the same amount of with like say your fixed paycheck or like your normal paycheck. You can only spend less money if there's more taxes. So it's not that. To decrease the level of demand. That sounds pretty reasonable to me because since there's less taxes now, people have less money to spend, and therefore there's less people going out and buying things or like buying goods, which decreases demand. And then to encourage corporate spending, well, why would they spend more if they're making less money because it's more taxes? That's just counterintuitive. Okay, so after the end of the Civil War, which goal did the federal government hope to accomplish during Reconstruction? Reconstruction, extending rights to Southern women. Well, we look back on our A push in U.S. history, extending the rights to Southern women. I do not remember hearing anything about extending rights to Southern women, as they were Southern women is quite a general term, and did nothing really happen in Reconstruction? Because we know Reconstruction and the Civil War are both related to slavery and the rights of African Americans in the U.S. So it can't be this. So establishing freedoms for former slaves sounds pretty good to me because Reconstruction, which is after the freedom of all the slaves, and establishing equality for them. So that sounds pretty good. Ensuring political power for Southern Democrats. No, this one's a hard no. So like back during the Civil War, it was Republicans in the North who were anti-slavery, and then Democrats in the South who were pro-slavery. And Southern Democrats in particular were very pro-slavery. So why would the federal government help the the political party that they just defeated in a war helped them retain power, who supported the institution of slavery, which the North want to abolish. So no, it can't be this. And guaranteeing Southern white control over social and economic condition of African Americans. This one's obviously a no because that's just the opposite of what the Civil War was about. And basically, that wasn't the goal of Reconstruction, which is the goal of Reconstruction was to establish equality between African Americans and white people, and like bringing African Americans back to speed within the society. So select all the ways the federal government attempted to accomplish the goal of establishing freedoms for former slaves. Well, obviously, for more freedom, you gotta abolish slavery to give slaves freedom. Establishment of Jim Crow laws. No, no, this one's a hard no. Jim Crow laws were a bunch of laws passed within the South, in the South, that were aimed to discriminate and restrict uh, African Americans, people of color, from voting and having equality in like segregation. Jim Crow established segregation. Jim Crow's laws were passed after Plessy versus Ferguson, which established the idea of separate but equal. So no. The ratification of the 14th Amendment. So what did the 14th Amendment do? Is gave citizenship and equal equal application of the law to everyone. So yes, because if you're a citizen of this, well, if you're a citizen of the country, you're entitled to a lot of rights. And well, the Constitution applies to everyone, but like, yeah, you get more freedom and protection because of the 14th Amendment. 19th Amendment, former slaves. Well, the 19th Amendment was women's suffrage. That didn't really have too much in relation to former slaves in particular, so no. And guaranteeing the African Americans the right to vote. Yes, because African Americans didn't have the right to vote in the entirety of the U.S. Some states in the North had uh, African Americans vote, but it was not explicitly stated and guaranteed by the Constitution. So it's those three. How can a state become involved in addressing problems that affect the entire state? So, joining a community watch group, uh, that that just brings the issue up. It doesn't really address the problem. By volunteering for the fire department, well, that only serves the local community, not the entire state. By signing petitions to place issues on the ballot, yes, that would help address problems that affect the entire state. Because if the issue is placed onto the ballot, that means everyone within the state will be able to make a decision and vote on whether to support the resolution addressing the issue. And then by attending a meeting of the local school board, well, again, that only addresses the local community. Uh, and not like everyone, not the entire state. So it's the third option here. Okay, so in 1851, Ohio drafted a new constitution that was meant to address problems of the original state constitution. These problems included dress codes for women. No, it did not address any of those things. Uh, an overburdened judicial dance. Yes, it did. Supreme Court had to wander around the country, and that made the judicial process very, very inefficient and kind of slowish and not the best. And then the 51 Constitution established more district courts to help alleviate the problem. And then, so that has one. A significant amount of state government debt. Yes, it did. The 51 Constitution uh, put a limit on how much debt the state could incur, and how much it limited them, like kind of like deficit, and required a balanced budget for the state legislature. And then an overly powerful legislative branch. Yes, the legislative branch was the most powerful of the three branches and had immense power prior to the 51 Constitution. And then graduated tax rates. I think there were some, well, I think the 51 Constitution did reform the tax code a little bit, but it didn't say anything about graduated tax rates. Well, if you don't know what graduated tax rates, it's the more wealth you have, the more you get taxed. So like if you're making like very little money, you won't be taxed a lot, or you won't be taxed much. But the more money you start making, the more money you get taxed. So like if you're making a lot of money, you get taxed quite a bit more than someone who's making just a little bit of money. So select the ways that the Ohio Constitution of 1851 addressed the problems of the previous Constitution. Well, like I said, there was an overburdened judicial branch, so it created district courts to spread out the judicial load more evenly, and significant amount of state government debt. It instituted debt limitations, how much debt the state could incur. It forgave all outstanding state debt. That is just not economically sound, and that's defaulting on your debt, which is very, very bad. But no, that was not a thing in the new constitution. It allowed the judicial branch to appoint legislative officials. That just does not make any sense. That's not really democracy, because the legislature is elected by the people, not the judicial branch, and it's the legislative branch that confirm or not confirm. Okay, the judicial branch is elected by the people also now in the new constitution. So no, the judicial branch does not appoint people in the legislative branch. So it required major executive officials to be elected. Yes, that was one of the issues that were corrected. In the previous one, like I said, it was the legislative General Assembly that would appoint major executive officials, but now they are elected. It restricted the number of cases that could be brought to trial in the state each year. That's just bogus. That just does not make sense, and it's not very sound in general. So no. Which statement accurately describes the relationship between Ohio Constitution and the U.S. Constitution? Ohio laws overrule federal laws when there is conflict. No, that violates the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, which says federal law is over state law. So no. All articles in the Ohio Constitution must be the same as all articles of the U.S. Constitution. That is also false, because the 10th Amendment states that explicitly power not stated in the Constitution is given to the states, and it just wouldn't make too much sense to copy the U.S. Constitution. The structure of the Ohio Constitution does not resemble the structure of the U.S. Constitution. That is false, because the Ohio Constitution does take some of, if or like a decent amount of the U.S. Constitution as like a basis for it is Constitution, but they do, but so they do resemble each other. I'm sorry. I hope I do make sense still. The Ohio Constitution is consistent with the key principles of the U.S. Constitution, but contains some laws that differ from the laws of the U.S. Constitution. Well, since we process of elimination, this one is the one that is the answer. And the U.S., like I said in the previous question, the U.S. Constitution is based off of the U.S. Constitution and the key principles, but like since it's a state constitution, it has differences. Which branch of government interprets the law? Well, let's see. Legislative branch, they make the laws. Dictaphone, I have zero clue what that is, so it's not that. It's not one of the branches of the government. Well, not one of the three branches. Executive, well, they're the ones who carry out the law and enforce it, so no. Judicial, they have judicial review and interpret what the law means. So, which branch of government approves treaties with foreign nations? Let's see. The legislative branch, yes, they have the power to declare war and ratify treaties. So, yeah, let's see. Executive branch, no, they don't have the power. They don't have any of the power. They don't have that power under their constitution. They just enforce and carry out actions. Judicial, they just interpret the law, which doesn't really have to do anything with treaties with foreign nations. And podcasts, well, no. So what makes someone's opinion or position more credible? Well, this is quite common sense. Qualifications, relevance of the source. If they have credentials and whatnot about the specific topic that they probably be quite knowledgeable. Use of misleading statements, that's the opposite of credible. Use of facts, which is credible. Shouting loudly. Just because you're shouting doesn't mean you're actually better or your position is right. Using many exclamation marks, same thing as shouting loudly. That's just nothing. Consistency and agreement between sources. If other people agree with you, your position, or many people agree with your statement and opinion and whatnot, that usually means that it's got some fact to it. So the passage of the 19th Amendment allowed greater participation in the government. Which group gained nationwide suffrage as a result of the 19th Amendment? Let's see. Start from the bottom this time, actually. Um, actually, let's start from the top. Actually, let's start from the top. So 18-year-olds. 18-year-olds were given suffrage by amendment, but it was not by the 19th Amendment. 18-year-olds were given suffrage in the 26th Amendment, not the 18th. So no. Men already had suffrage when the Constitution was made. So no. Former slaves, no, that was given during the 15th Amendment, which gave uh, the right to vote to everybody, every citizen every male citizen in the U.S. And women, yes, it was women who gained the right to vote under the 19th Amendment, as the women's suffrage movement would gain strong momentum following World War One and the role that they played during World War One. Who received suffrage as a result of the 26th Amendment? Well, I said earlier, the 18-year-olds, the people getting sent to Vietnam. Okay. The Federal Reserve uses monetary tools to regulate the money supply and maintain growth and stability in the U.S. economy. One of these tools is the adjustment of the discount rate it charges financial institutions on loans from the Federal Reserve. What would happen if the Federal Reserve increased the discount rate? So like this part is a little bit confusing. So when they say discount rate, it's kind of like okay, discount rate. It's kind of it's a little bit confusing. So discount rate is kind of like how expensive it is to um like take out a loan. It's like the rate where banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve. So what happened if they increase the discount rate? Um, when they increase the discount rate, it's kind of like the opposite of anything of discount. It makes borrowing more expensive. So people would buy more houses. Well, many people have to take out a loan to buy more houses. And if borrowing rates are higher, loans are higher, why would they take out a loan to buy a house? So no, people would buy more organic vegetables. That does not really have anything to do with the economy and money supply. People would pay more for loans. It does make increasing the discount rate does make borrowing more expensive, and inflation would increase. No, that is not right. When there's less borrowing going on, there's less money. It will slow economic activity and lead to less inflation because now there's less people trying to buy stuff. Identify the appropriate branch and level of government to target this scenario shown for a bill. The U.S. Congress begins debate over a bill. Well, U.S. Congress debate over a bill. So it'd be the legislative branch, obviously. So we can cross out this one and this one, or this one and this one. And then at the U.S. Congress, so federal Congress. So we can cross out this one, but it says state level. So we're left with this one, legislative branch at the federal level, because U.S. Congress is federal level, Congress equals legislative. So identify the appropriate branch and level of government to target in this scenario for a bill. The bill becomes law, and the governor of Ohio directs agencies to implement its provisions. So, let's see, we got governor. And governor, what does the governor do? Governor carries out the actions. So we can cut out judicial and legislative one. And since it's governor, which means at the state level, it can't be executive at the federal level, because the executive at the federal level would be the president, and the executive at the state level is the governor. There's a quotation from Alexander Hamilton. Here, in the House of Representatives, sir, the people govern. Here they act by the immediate representatives. Which basic principle of governance is Hamilton highlighting? Federalism. That's just the division of power between state, local, and federal, which doesn't really have anything with people governing. Limited government, well, that doesn't really say anything about the people too much. Popular sovereignty, though, well, that does, because popular sovereignty is the idea that citizens are able to uh, directly participate in elections and that the government's power comes from the people in their vote. Separation of powers, it doesn't really say anything about three branches of government and whatnot. Oh, last question. Identify which event led to the adoption of the 21st Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So, let's see. 21st Amendment, what is that? It's the repeal of prohibition. Prohibition is like the banning of alcohol. World War II, no, they didn't really have anything. The increase in crime and ineffective enforcement of prohibition. Well, maybe. Could be. the women's suffrage movement was successful. Well, it was the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote. So no, not this. Civil War, that's just out of the period. That's I think nearly 50 years. No, no, 40-ish years after the end of the Civil War. So no, so it has to be this one. The increasing crime and ineffective enforcement of prohibition. Because when you ban alcohol, when you ban something completely like alcohol or something, obviously there's going to be some underground black market that's doing illegal activities to try and sell alcohol. So yeah, let's see. Submit. Hey, 25 out of 25. Well, thank you for studying with me, I guess. Hope this helps.